Thanks for joining us on this second episode of Against the Mountains of Madness. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me is our other host, John C. Wright. And on today's episode, we're going to chat about the question, what is truth? So, John,
Yes.
want to take a stab at the question? What is truth?
Truth is when a man who says that it is. Truth is when your words and your thoughts correspond to reality, that what you're saying is actually true. That's it's about as simply as I can put it.
Well, I suppose that's, yes, Aristotle's correspondence theory of truth.
Aristotle's correspondence theory of truth. Now, as a faithful Christian...
I agree. What else can you do?
As a faithful Christian, we also know that truth is a man named Christ, who is also the logos, or the reason, the measurement, the accord of the universe. That's getting a little too mystical and deep right away, right at the beginning, because that's the truth that brings life and that creates beauty and virtue, which are the imperishables of life. So for now, let us just say there are certain things called symbols and certain things called reality, and when the symbols reflect the reality they're meant to reflect, that's true, and when they do not reflect the reality they're meant to reflect, that is less true.
Are there degrees of truth?
Oh, yes, there's a statement can be true but be inaccurate. A statement can be an overgeneralization. In fact, any statement, no matter how precise, can always be made slightly more precise if you're willing to waste your time. But true, absolute precision is impossible, because you can't, for example, in one sentence, identify the location of every atom in the cosmic universe. So there's degrees of accuracy, and there's also degrees of intention. There are things that are where untruths are meant to deceive people and create a false picture of reality. But the picture is never the reality itself. The map is never the territory. There's always some details that, for the sake of sanity, have to be left out, just for the sake of coherency and clarity of speech. So yeah, there's degrees of untruth, and there's the sin of deliberate untruth. There's bearing false witness against your neighbor.
Yep.
And then beyond that, beyond untruth is insanity, and beyond insanity is political correctness. So there's several degrees of how untruthful you want to be, how far away from Christ, the truth, you want to go. So
there you go. And everything comes back together again to the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Yes.
And the three of them are linked together.
Yeah.
But that's always true.
Right.
There was a line from The Big Bang Theory I actually thought that was illustrative of degrees of truth. When, what is it? A tomato is a fruit, or a tomato is a suspension bridge. One of these is closer to the truth than the other. No, a tomato is a vegetable. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Tomato is also it's also a good-looking girl, so that's also a truth. You see, I'm a fiction writer. I'm a novelist. I believe that you can use non-literal statements, metaphorical statements, and mystical statements to convey a truth that can't be said literally. Those things are not false, but they are not a one-to-one correspondence between the thing and the thing meant to be represented, between the speech and the object. You see?
Yes. Well, I suppose yes, they're literally false, but
right.
Metaphorically true.
They're literally false, but non-literally true. Right. But when a novel tells you the opposite of the truth, tells you is a false metaphor, is a bad or misleading metaphor, I would say, for example, the movie The Last Jedi is false. And not just because it's a fiction, not just because it takes place in a galaxy long ago and far away. Star Wars was also a fiction taking place in a galaxy long ago and far away. But it was true, because its heart was true. Even though it was not literally true. Those people don't actually exist.
But it's trying to communicate truth to you in a way The Last Jedi is trying to communicate.
Correct.
Convince you of falsehoods.
Correct. The truth in Star Wars was that the hero throws his lightsaber away rather than kill his own father, because forgiveness can actually redeem the unredeemable. That's a shocking truth. That we don't expect that to happen in real life. But it is true.
This is true.
Whereas in Last Jedi, the teacher tries to go kill his student in his sleep when the kid, his nephew, goes to try to kill his nephew in the sleep because he fears the nephew might do something untoward or evil. And so there's no redemption there, not even an attempt at redemption. And the hero then goes and sulks on an island. He then casts his shadow onto another planet to try to overcome the oppression, and the bad guys can't even hurt him, so he makes no sacrifice, and then he merely fades away. So that is either incomprehensible, or it's a Marxist idea of what it means to be a completely self-actualized person, where you only do the work you wish to do, like fish with an absurdly long fish spear. You live in isolation because you don't need anyone else, and then after you've done your mission to help overthrow the tyranny, you fade away because you overcome the need for a material body, or something. It's false on many levels because it's a false myth. It's a Marxist myth, basically.
Is it a false myth because it's a Marxist? Are all Marxist myths false?
Marxist myths,
or all false myths Marxist?
Marxist myths are false, but there are many other false myths that are not Marxist.
Yes. This is true. Okay, so do you know of any alternatives to the correspondence theory of truth? Actually, I suppose we could look at something like the coherence theory of truth that says if all of the statements cohere together, or are all coherent and make sense together, that makes them true. But if you
there are other theories, yes. I don't happen to hold to them, but the coherence theory of truth is that truth is whatever the logically follows from your axioms. But then the coherence theory doesn't say how I judge when my axiom is true or not. You see, you run into what we might call a Gödelian problem of interpretation. If I can come up with a set of geometrical propositions like Lobachevsky geometry, non-Euclidean geometry, not only does that summon Cthulhu, it also, there doesn't seem to be anything in the real world at the speeds, conditions, and temperatures found on the surface of the Earth that correspond to that in any way, shape, or form. We never see parallel lines actually converge, even though they do seem to converge due to perspective. Does that make sense? So you can have a perfectly coherent theory that doesn't correspond to anything, and I will point to Marxist economics as another example of a theory that it's not exactly coherent. But if it were coherent, it would not refer to anything. The garbage in, garbage out is the way the computer programmers say it. If your axioms are wrong, your conclusions are going to be wrong, even if your conclusions and your axioms cohere with each other. Now, to say by the coherence theory of truth, there's no such thing as an untrue logical model, right? Because if it coheres with its axioms, if it follows logically from its assumptions, then it's true by that definition of truth. But then if you don't see whether it's true in real life, what good is it? It's a word game. It's a mental exercise.
Yep, definitely.
So, by its own definition, the coherence theory of truth is coherent with itself, but it doesn't correspond to anything in reality.
Well, I was going to say it's defective because it's defective, but has an appeal to it because the correspondence it's sort of, in a sense, it's a subset of the correspondence theory of truth. It's
a subset
because, reality will cohere together. Like, the truth will be coherent. The truth can't be opposed to itself.
Yes.
By definition, but it's incomplete.
Well, reality is not incomplete. Our theories of reality are incomplete, thanks to Gödel.
Okay, that's fine. But what I meant is like the correspondence theory of truth, the coherence theory of truth is sort of, you've taken the correspondence theory of truth and you've removed a bit away from it because the correspondence theory of truth is going to include the coherence theory of truth.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That makes sense.
You're saying that in order for that any coherence theory of truth, if it models real reality, since reality is logical, will also have to be logical. Yes, I agree.
Yes.
I agree. That's, in fact, that is the prime method that human beings use to discover whether or not the truth is true. If the truth they think is true, if their opinions create a logical paradox or a logical contradiction with itself, then they know that's not true. See? Now, at that point, you have two options. The honest man, reaching an absurd conclusion, goes back and questions his premises. The intellectual, seeing a conclusion that makes no sense, adheres to the conclusion and then rejects the facts that would lead him to question his axioms. You say, we spoke in our last episode of a woman of my acquaintance who, becoming convinced that only observables exist, but no non-observables, no noumena, no reality underlying the appearances of reality, became convinced that she herself did not exist. Only her outward properties existed, her local manifestations of her particular height, weight, sex, personality traits, but no selfness that owned the personality traits. So, like she could be a mother, and the person who she was before she was a mother has no bearing on her, even though she had the same name at the time. And before and after marriage, she had changed her last name, but according to her, that made her two different people, not one person with a changed name and a changed matrimonial status, Well, and so when I tried to ask her, well, who to whom are these things happening? She had no answer. So the problem with the coherence, with the correspondence theory of truth is, you ask, well, to whom are these things happening? Who is the philosopher that has this correspondence theory? Does he actually exist? Because you didn't make up the philosopher who's doing the philosophy. You don't have a model for where he came from or how all his thoughts work because you don't understand yourself. See?
Yep. I was going to say it reminds me of the eliminative, what is it? In the philosophy of mind, the eliminative materialists who want to reduce everything to brain chemistry, hormones, electricity,
yes.
And they eliminate everything else that isn't explainable by that.
I have to confess, I used to be very vexed with eliminative materialists until I found the proper combination of chemicals that I can just inject directly into their cortex with a bone needle to alter their thinking, to change their minds.
Dare I ask what it is?
Oh no, it's whiskey alcohol. I mean, once you get them drunk enough, they just simply stop being eliminative materialists. So I think that's how it works.
Would work.
No, I'm kidding. I believe that the amount of whiskey only impairs your judgment. I don't think it actually changes your philosophical stances. You'd have to identify which atoms the materialist thinks in his brain make him a materialist and move them. But the irony, of course, is that if someone did move those atoms, would the materialist himself actually be convinced? Or are those merely his certain outward properties, like my friend who went from having a maiden name to a married name? If I was an eliminative materialist and someone said, "Oh no, I can stab you with a bone needle and it will change your mind so that you become, a correspondence theory of truth," so you become a mentalist, someone who believes that mind has substance also. Would that be convincing to you? Would that be satisfactory? Or do you insist that there's a certain process you're supposed to go through to become convinced of something? You see the problem? The problem is, I said last time, Wright's first rule of philosophy is never adopt a philosophy that eliminates the philosopher. It's self-defeating.
It's a good place to start. It's a good place to start with anything, really.
Now, here's the funny thing about truth. The mainstream of every man and every society has a certain unstated philosophy they live by, whatever their worldview is. And as we said last time, either you examine your life and you see and you put into words, you articulate what your worldview is, or you are the helpless slave, the helpless pawn of whatever the consensus happens to have deposited in the lint box of your mind. Okay, you'll believe a random collection of things that you picked up from parents, books, education, and television commercials. Okay, same for a society. A society either can articulate the myths it's based on, the stories it's based on, or it can't. And I say stories because truly important things can only be said in stories. If you want real truth, you have to turn to poetry. You can't, or parable. You can't say real truth in scientific fashion. That will only give you a list of particulars. Now, those particulars are really useful. You can't build a bridge with a poem. But when you're deciding whether to build a bridge or not, you better have at least a John Henry song in mind to tell you how to get things done and what you're doing it for, why you're doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So every society has to have a foundational story. Well, in the West, in the modern day, our foundational story is that every man sets his own truth. That there is no truth. That there's no overarching, coherent, global truth. Now, this is the stupidest proposition I can imagine, because it refutes itself by being stated. If you say there is no truth, then that statement, if it's true, is false. Okay?
Of course.
Now, everyone knows this, so why do they say it? Well, they're speaking in metaphors, of course. They're speaking in poetical expression. What the metaphor is they're saying, I won't criticize you if you don't criticize me. I would like you to leave me alone with the falsehoods that comfort me, and in return I will do the same for you. So let's not argue about anything. Let's not think about anything. Let's enter the smoggy, foggy darkness of comfortable self-delusion. Now, there's a certain appeal to smoggy, foggy self-delusion, but not for a grown man, not for someone who has to get things done, not for a hero, not for a saint, not for a philosopher. Okay, in fact, the smoggy self-delusion is the enemy of the philosopher, the enemy of the saint, and the enemy of the hero. The enemy of all real, virtuous people. So why is it so popular? Well, cowardice lends a big role. Ego lends a big role. But most of all, it's kind of if you're in a pluralistic society and you really don't want to argue about the filioque controversy, and you really don't want to argue with your neighbor with whom you otherwise get along about whether or not man is justified by faith alone, or justified by faith in works, or justified by faith through works, or justified by faithful works worked through faith, or is not justified at all, or is if you don't want to argue about these things, but you just want to get along and do your business, retreating into the fog is mutually beneficial. It's really useful for a commercial and capitalist society, because the capitalist society wants to merely do business with everyone. Your money is green no matter what you think about fate or free will, so let's not discuss fate and free will. Your money is green whether you're Jew or Christian, so let's not discuss the position of Christ. You see? Now, the problem is that fog is corrosive. The problem is once you say, well, let's not argue about whether or not Christ is man or God, then you go, well, let's also not argue about whether or not free markets are necessary for free liberty. Let's not argue about whether or not a man who thinks he's a woman actually is a man or a woman. In fact, let's not argue, by which I mean you stop arguing. Let's not argue, by which I mean
Yes.
you repeat everything I
Shut
say
up.
as I say it, when I say it. And when I say the opposite, you must also say the opposite. You see? That's where the fog leads. The fog leads into deeper fog, which leads into darkness, which leads into hell itself. And if you want to see a clear picture of hell, you don't have to look further than a society that kills more babies in the womb than men died in the last 2 wars we fought. And if the babies make it out of the womb, then they go to public schools to be groomed for sexual perversions and allowed to pick their own gender, of which only 1 or 2 out of 57 are chaste. You see the problem with having more than 3 or 9 genders? If you're only supposed to have sex in marriage with a lifelong marital partner, as God and man intended, then how would you find out if you are pan, furry, homo, post-asexual, male-female, hermaphroditic, post-lesbian?
Yes.
How would you know? You know, no matter what your sexual preference is, if you're only going to have sex inside marriage, and it's only going to be sex and not sodomy, not something that just pretends to be sex, if your marriage is going to be true, then why do you need more genders than 2? Well, the answer is you don't. The answer is the only reason why people are talking about gender at all is to worship at the idol of untruth. See, untruth is the beast of the prophecy. Untruth is the glorious idol that our modern society has erected so that we don't have to deal with the logos, with the rational, with the true, the beautiful, and the good. If every man's opinion about the true and the beautiful and the good is equally good with everyone else's opinion, then we could all get along without asking any questions. But you find out that once you start saying every man's opinion is true, you end up with saying Caesar's opinion is true, the majority is true. Only what Mark Zuckerberg allows on social media is true. Everything else is hate speech and disinformation. So you have to shut up now. That's the problem with the correspondence theory of truth. Is at least the hell.
The coherence theory of truth.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said the wrong name. I said an untrue
You
thing.
did. It's fine.
Yep.
No, it's fine. I was going to say, it's not a majority, though. The people pushing all of this are a tiny, tiny minority.
Certainly.
I mean, they're corrupting a lot. They're corrupting a lot of people, but and they're scaring the majority into not saying anything. But
I call them the Morlocks.
A tiny collection.
I call them the Morlocks and the Eloi. That there's a small minority of cannibal, subterranean, subhuman murderers, and a large number of people who simply don't have enough get up and go to get up and go when they need to. They don't have enough self determination not to disagree with the herd. But they are they're not numerically a majority, no, but they do control the major institutions.
This is true.
But it's mostly Eloi. It's mostly people who would be just as happy doing the opposite if told to.
Well, but it is scary to go against the herd.
Yeah, and the Morlocks use that fear even when they're going against the herd. They puff themselves up like frogs. They make themselves look bigger than they are. No one actually thinks men can turn into women. No one really believes that. They say it because they are afraid not to, or because they want to display their loyalty to untruth. They want to display to the world and to defy God. They want to display to the world that they're stronger than reality. That reality has to give way before their fervor. Okay.
But when, are you sure some of them don't believe it? I mean,
I'm not a mind reader. Maybe some of them believe it. I'm sure that they. I'm sure that they can enter a mystical, vague state of mind where words don't have any relation to reality. They all believe in the coherence theory of truth. Sure, they believe it. Why not? They believe that the air vibrations coming out of their mouth exist, and whether those air vibrations make sense or not, I don't think is their concern. To answer your question is no, I don't think they believe it. I don't think true and false exist as categories in their minds. I think that they are beyond true and false the same way Nietzsche was beyond good and evil. I think they only think of things as being politically correct and politically incorrect. And they say the thing that's correct and they don't say the thing that's incorrect. And they don't care whether it's true or not. They don't even know whether it's true or not. Some of them might believe their own propaganda. It's possible.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's not a question of do they believe it. Such a question is far in the rearview mirror of where they are at.
I believe it's like a question of asking a professional advertising agent whether he believes in the product he's advertising. He's merely hired to put words on a page to make someone buy the product. That's his job. Now you're asking, well, does he take his work home? Does he actually use that same product at home? Who cares? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. You see, the words are false. The Marxist theory of truth is that whatever helps the party is true. The Marxist theory of truth is that words are weapons used by the oppressor to oppress the oppressed. So when I say men are male, I think I'm saying A equals A. But the Marxists think I'm saying you females are inferior to me and must do your jobs and must serve me and are my slaves. They think I'm attacking them. Okay? Now, the guy's hallucinating, the guy's insane, but he doesn't actually believe that. No, I don't think they believe it. Maybe I'm being too cynical. I don't see anyone can actually walk around and look at mammals and say, no, there's no such thing as a rooster and a hen. Those don't exist. No, there's no such thing as a dog and a bitch. Those don't exist. There's no such thing as a fox and a vixen. Those don't exist. Really? There's no steers
Well,
and there's no cows? That they don't exist at all? Then where
I
do
mean,
where
they'd
do
say
little cows
that,
come from?
they'd say their existence. Well, they'd say at least for humans, the existence is all. They exist in the sense that they're socially constructed. They don't correspond to anything in the real
Okay,
world.
so during the
I mean,
Stone Ages,
I agree, it's insane. But
during the Stone Ages, did chickens, did hens and roosters exist? You see, what they're doing is a word game. What they're doing is saying,
yeah,
sex is the subjective perception of sex. The objective perception, the objective reality doesn't concern me. Sex is the social role, you know. And the social role can be modified by society. In fact, we recently underwent such a differentiation in social roles. Women stopped being happy housemakers so that they could become unhappy workers.
worker drones.
Yeah,
yes.
worker drones.
But I mean,
because the feminists stood up and said, I will not be dictated to. So she immediately got a job and became a secretary, taking shorthand.
Yes. The irony is lost on them, but probably not on many of us. I suppose the problem with a lot of this is it's not entirely untrue. Like, if you're going to sell someone a falsehood, the easiest falsehood to sell is one that is mostly true and just untrue at the right point, but not on the whole untrue. Because after all, it's definitely true. Different cultures have different roles for men and women.
That's correct. Because in pagan society, women were mothers and wives and homemakers, and in Christian society, women are mothers and wives and homemakers. And in the East, they're mothers and wives and homemakers. And among tribal peoples, they're mothers and wives and teepee makers. So yes, there's vast differences between the roles.
Hang on.
But you're right. Those roles can be changed.
Back up a step. Well, what I meant was like I agree. There's a large similarity. There's a truth underlying
Certainly.
it, which is all of these. There's a core. This is what it is to be male and female.
The social expectations.
But the way it might play out is different.
The social expectations set by your sex can differ between societies and year to year. There was a time not long ago when women didn't vote, for example. Okay, that's a social expectation. They weren't expected to vote, and they couldn't. They were not legally allowed. Okay, if you want to change that, then go be a suffragette. That's fine. But notice the difference between saying that and saying women should be allowed to vote because they're males. And you go, well, wait a minute, they're not males because males give birth. Males don't give birth. And they say, oh no, males do give birth. Then at what point? How do you continue the conversation at that point? They're merely using the word to refer to something that they know it doesn't refer to make normal speech impossible. Because there's another sense of the word truth that we haven't mentioned. A sword that is weak is untrue. A man who betrays his lord is untrue to his lord. If I play you false, if a seller sells his customer bad goods, he's being untrue to his customer. If you cheat on your wife, you're being untrue. You're being you're acting without faith. You're being unfaithful. You're an infidel, you see. So truth is not just correspondence with reality. It's also coherence in the moral sense of not just are your words a lie, but is your life a lie? See, and these guys want to live a lie. They don't actually think that men can be women and women can be men. What they want to do is create enmity between the sexes. They want to stir up hatred between perverts and chaste people.
To what possible end? Well, I suppose in service of their glorious revolution.
Revenge.
No, that's not even true. That's not even true anymore.
Revenge.
I don't think. Yeah, that's fair because I don't think the modern sort of.
I agree.
Marxist is interested in the glorious revolution. They just want to burn everything down. I don't think they have any plans for what to do once they reduce everything to a pile of ashes.
You and I think the same thing. I also do not think they have any plan to build the Towers of Utopia. I begin to wonder if they ever did, if just merely destroying things was the plan from the get-go. It was certainly Hell's plan, whether the human instruments, whether the human puppets of Uncle Screwtape knew it or not, if you take my meaning. But no, I don't hear them talking about a glorious future. All I hear them talking about is a miserable present, and about the fact that they feel oppressed when they're in charge.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
It is, because they're untrue. You see, here's the thing. Once you're untrue, it affects everything. It starts slowly. You think you only need to tell a lie in one area about one thing. But then you have to tell a second lie to cover the first lie. And it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. And once you're committed to the cover-up, you have to cover up the cover-up. And then more and more things get tied into what you originally thought was merely a political discussion. Somehow it becomes a discussion about human nature. Somehow it becomes a philosophical discussion, then a religious discussion, and then you start out by saying, Kennedy was killed by a single gunman. And then you go, wait a minute, wasn't Kennedy's father a mafioso guy? Couldn't it have been the mafia? And then they say, oh, no, now that's a conspiracy theory. We don't want you to investigate it. Now, I myself suddenly become suspicious at the moment they say, we don't want you to investigate it. Okay, well, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, maybe it's not. But once you're asking me not to investigate something, that's a little suspicious. So once I ask the question about that, then they have to say, well, you have certain other obligations to society, including not speaking, not calling on the First Amendment. So that suddenly becomes a discussion about what my rights are. And then I say, well, I want to speak the truth. And they go, oh, speaking the truth is rude. It's inappropriate. You see, then that becomes a discussion about courtesy and society and the spirit of the times. Well, then I go, but wait a minute, doesn't truth overcome courtesy? Does courtesy require I lie to someone who is, capable of handling the truth? Where does courtesy end and morality begin? Then that becomes a discussion of ethics. Well, suddenly this discussion about a political assassination from 60 years ago is now a metaphysical discussion about whether or not truth is true. About whether or not you're allowed to say things. When Matt Walsh interviewed someone during his movie, What is a Woman?, a teacher of philosophy, a professor, said it was offensive for Mr. Walsh to say he was asking the question because he wanted to know the truth of the matter. Introducing truth into a philosophical discussion, according to this professor, was rude and inappropriate. Okay, no true man says that. No honest man says that, you see. Because once you say there's no truth, not only have you contradicted yourself, you've also proved that you're not an honest man, you see. Because in order even to ask the question, should I be honest, you have to accept the rule of honesty. You have to accept the truth is true in order to even ask whether or not it is. Okay? It's a foundational assumption, an axiom you can't avoid unless you avoid thinking altogether in the comfortable fog I mentioned earlier. But if you don't avoid thinking altogether, then you have to be honest. And honest means you have to be true in the other sense of the word truth, which is coherent with yourself morally. In other words, in order to be true, you also have to be good and beautiful. Spiritually beautiful, morally good.
Yeah. Well,
I should also hasten to add that the one argument I have with my wife, which will never be settled, she and I will never see eye to eye on this, is she believes they all actually mean it. Not them all. She believes that most people mean it. The Eloi all actually mean what they say when they say men or women, up is down, black is white. Okay. Now, neither she nor I are mind readers, so I don't know what they really think. All I know is that what's coming out of their mouth is self-contradictory.
I think you had probably the right insight there a little earlier, where they're beyond. They believe it in the sense that whatever's coming out of their mouth is true for them.
Well, I believe mysteries in my religion. There are things that I cannot rationally comprehend. Like, how can God be three persons with one substance? How can Christ both be 100% man and 100% God? That's 200%. I mean, it makes my mind spin. I don't think I can rationally understand it any more than I can stare at the sun. But I do notice that without the sunlight, I can't see anything. So I'm willing to accept those beliefs as axiomatic without being able to justify them further. I'm merely taking them on trust because I heard them from a trustworthy source. I think they're true because the
But
person who told them to me is truthful. Does that make sense? Is trustworthy. But
they are
I have
coherent,
mysteries in
though.
my religion. In the Satanist religion, they
Of
also
course.
have mysteries, one of which is that is not. That A is not A. That's one of their core beliefs, that reality is whatever they say
Well.
it is. Because they're God. That's the core belief of everyone who eats from the apple of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is that you'll become like a god, and you'll be able to say what reality is for yourself. You'll be able to make up your own new moral rules. And if you don't want to have unchastity on that list of morals, you can erase it. If you want to have pride be a virtue rather than a vice, you can add it to your Pride Month and your Pride Day. If you want to have lies, you can call it politically correctness, because you don't have to call it by its right name, because lies are now lawful, right? You see how it works? Once you're God, once you're untrue to human nature.
Oh yeah, once you or was it Aristotle, I think, who said, I will paraphrase and butcher this, but all of the virtues hold together like a wheel, and if you try to bend one spoke of the wheel, everything gets out of alignment from there. Before you know it, the whole thing
Okay.
collapses. I'm sure Aristotle didn't say it like that, but that's sort of the analogy that I always found useful.
He said it in Homeric hexameters and sounded much better in ancient Greek. O de electon
I'm sure it
ton
would have.
panton, eploria kaios, or something like that.
But I think it's a useful analogy. Like it all holds together like the spokes on a bike wheel, and
It all holds
if you
together
bend one,
because
everything else will come out. Everything else will be corrupted and go out of alignment along with it. You can't be a little bit corrupt. This is always true, isn't it? You can aspire to a certain level of virtue and work towards it, but there's no level of corruption. That just always gets worse and worse, and you sink lower and lower. There's no bottom, unfortunately.
there's no bottom floor to hell. Every time you think you've hit rock bottom, the floor breaks under your feet and you're plunged into a deeper and more fiery pit. That's true. Because corruption, in order to protect itself, has to breed more corruption. In the process I just mentioned, because every question is coherently locked to a broader question where it takes its nature, where every question exists in a context, and once you falsify the question, you have to falsify the context. That context also exists in a greater context. Once you falsify that, you have to falsify the greater. So more and more of your model of the universe, more and more of the picture of what you're saying, has to become false, and it has to be more and more outrageously false as time goes on. Now, in modern America and Australia, we've reached peak falsehood of people who are saying things that are absolutely provably 180 degrees away from what is true, and doing so with no fear of repercussion. Because I just want to tie it back into the Aristotle's wheel. If if reality is coherent, you can't make a picture of unreality, even in a small thing, without jarring the rest of the picture out of its frame. That's what you were talking about. So even a small falsehood will grow. Now, I will say this also. The reason why it's a process is that for a while you can get away with considerable flexibility. For a while you can get away with believing something in one corner of your mind and just having it not come up, for example. But then once that, you can have beliefs in your head that you never have to act on, and if they're incoherent with each other, they don't matter. But once the time comes to act, and you believe two things that are opposite, you have to pick. Either you do it or you don't do it. See? And once you have committed to a certain action, especially if you're proud and cannot admit you are wrong, then it's on a ratchet. If you can't admit you're wrong, if you're proud, you cannot get your hand out of the fish trap. You can only go forward. You can never go backward, because to go backward requires admitting you were wrong. See, but to go forward only requires that you say, I haven't made enough sacrifices of other people's time and money yet. I haven't. The party hasn't killed enough people yet. As soon as we kill the requisite number of people, we will achieve the goal of a society without money, for example, or a cause without effect,
Yeah.
or effect without cause, or whatever it is they're aiming at. You see, because that's the allure of untruthfulness. People adhere to untruthfulness to escape the law of cause and effect. They want to escape morality. They want to escape the consequences of their action. They want to
Yeah.
they want to get redeemed without going to confession. They don't want to do the penance. That's the basic reason why people love falsehoods, because the truth is too bitter for them.
Well, I suppose that's a challenge. If you won't repent, then you're kind of stuck. Although actually, an author I love, Jay Budiszewski, which is not how you spell that, and I will put it on the screen, wrote a really fascinating book called What You Can't Not Know, which centers on, I believe it was Aquinas said that, there are things you can't not know.
Right.
You know them even if you can't deny them, and even if you claim to. And he was talking about the moral law.
Well, we've mentioned two such things in this talk so far. You can't not know there's a truth, because if there's no truth, the statement there is no truth is true. You can't not know that honesty is a moral imperative, because if you say it's not, you have to be honest in order to honestly say that it's not. So there's certain things,
Of course.
certain questions you can't ask without assuming the basis of the question. And the moral law is one of those things. You can't, as the book title correctly says, there's certain things you can't not know, much as you'd like to.
What was fascinating? One of the things I found most fascinating about his thesis, though, was he said the problem was people know the moral truth, but they don't want to live it.
Right.
They don't want to abide by it, so they try to push it down, and like corks in a bathtub, they keep bubbling up, and it's difficult to deal with. But the real challenge is, when you've done the wrong thing, what you need to do is you need to repent of your wrongdoing, make amends with the people, confess your wrongdoing. There's things you're driven to do, and if you do these things, that's how you deal with your transgressions and wrongdoing. You make amends and you confess and apologize, and that's what your conscience will drive you to do, and it'll start by making you feel guilty, and that's the little thing that sort of pushes you to start down this process of repentance and reconciliation. But if you won't do it, you're still driven to do all of the steps in the process. You're still driven to confess and atone and reconcile. You're driven to do this, but because you won't repent and you won't admit what you're doing is wrong, you try to do all of these other things in a false way.
There's several ways, if I may. One is you accuse everyone around you of the sin that you're doing.
Yep.
The other is that you try to get some friendly authority, like the government, to fight against the wrongdoing that you did by having it declared as a matter of public policy that people shouldn't act that way. The other way is you actually do confess, but you don't realize what you're confessing. It's almost Freudian, if you know what I mean. Like you print an article in the New York Times saying that you stole the election while calling everyone who believes the election was stolen a conspiracy theorist. And I've noticed that that wicked people often will write books saying exactly what they intend to do and what they did, and they will write them as confessionals. They'll say so, but I've always thought that was maybe one of the. It seems hellish to me because they're not aware that they're doing it. So it fits in with this author you're mentioning.
Well, one of the things he cited that I thought was the example he cited that I thought was fascinating of confession is the Jerry Springer Show. Is essentially people confessing to just really horrible things out public in front of everybody, but doing so without admitting it's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, what is driving these people to make insane spectacles of themselves like this and try to justify their obviously abhorrent behavior? But, something's driving them, and it's insane. And it's weird. I mean, I've noticed with, there was a fascinating interview with, It might have been Abby Johnson. It was a woman who used to run an abortion clinic, who's come to Christ and has repented of that and now dedicates herself to working in a pro-life cause. I think it's Abby Johnson, but she was saying one of the things I found interesting in the interview was she said one of the things when she was working in the industry that used to drive her absolutely insane was little baby feet pins that the pro-lifers would wear, and like this would just drive her absolutely around the bend, just drive her into a rage when she'd see them. And it's strange because why? I mean, if you don't, it doesn't make sense to get upset at that if you don't actually know it's a baby and you're only pretending it's not because you want to kill it. So you're driven to dehumanize them, but you can't quite. You can't escape what you actually know. So you're driven to try to suppress anything that pricks your conscience or makes it difficult for you. The other example is slaveholders are the same. They know it's not right to own other human beings, so they dehumanize the slaves and say they're not really humans.
Christian slave owners do that. I've never seen even the slightest evidence that Aristotle or any pagan slave owner ever felt even the slightest qualm about that. Now, I do think the pagans felt bad about exposing infants, and I think the Oedipus myth, which is a story of an exposed infant coming and killing the father who exposed it, is an expression of guilt. But on the other hand, Aristotle does go out of his way to call slaves merely articulate instruments, tools that could move themselves. So maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he did actually have a qualm of guilt about that.
Well,
but the southern slave owners in America, they clearly had to come up with elaborate justifications for their peculiar institution.
Well, the other example that might be clearer is cannibals. Apparently, not being super familiar with cannibalistic tribes, I will have to take the author's word for it. But they say, the people they're cannibalizing aren't really human beings. They're the only true humans are in their tribe, so the people outside of their tribe can be preyed upon and cannibalized as prey.
Yeah.
But they go through elaborate rituals when they kill them because, and this is a hint that actually they're quite aware what they're doing is wrong and killing a human being, and that they shouldn't do that, and they're trying to. The ritual is part of their trying to atone for what they're doing, while not quite admitting what they're doing is actually wrong. I don't do this author justice. I don't do Jay Budiashevsky justice at all.
We can recommend
in my descriptions, I'm sure, but I will recommend his book highly.
We can recommend his book. Certainly, the Nazis turning Jews into soap or going through the corpses for teeth, or anyone who mishandles a corpse is trying to dehumanize it, trying to dehumanize the murder. Mass graves are dehumanizing, but turning them into soap is more so. Now here's the funny thing: I don't believe any butcher actually dehumanizes swine or cows, before they turn into pork and beef. You only have to dehumanize a human to make them a prey. See, so I think your author is quite correct and is brilliant in his saying so. We all know the moral law, and what skeptics do, and I myself am a skeptic, so I've seen them do it, is they say, well, wait a minute, here in China we eat with chopsticks, and there in America they eat with fork and knife, so therefore the rule against murder is a social construct. Now, do you see any lapse in the logic there? Well, yeah. just because the Hindu lady wears a sari and the English lady wears a petticoat doesn't mean that both of them don't have a nudity taboo. See?
Exactly. The same with Muslims will take 4 wives and Christians will take only 1, but all of them recognize that matrimony is important and
Right.
regulation of sexual impulses
Right.
within matrimony is important
Right.
and is the way things ought to be. That none of them want to be. People will cite this difference and then use that as a justification for complete sexual anarchy, saying, "Well, clearly there's no rules." But actually,
No.
there are
It's like
rules,
saying
and there are obviously rules.
it's like men also have different languages, but it doesn't make lying a truthful thing to do. You know.
Yes.
See what they're doing? They're doing the same thing that my friend I mentioned earlier, who didn't know she existed, do. They can't see the difference between the particular expression and the one underlying reality that makes the expression expressed. You see, they can't. I'm expressing this very poorly. I wish I had a clearer terminology for it. They're ignoring the spirit of the thing in order to, because they say the only thing they're aware of is how the spirit is manifested. They only can see what's in front of their eyes. They can't see what's causing it. They only believe in effects, not in causes. You say, well,
Wow.
that's what a liar says. That's what I mean. When the little boy has the crumbs all over his hands and a chocolate over his mouth, and he goes, "Well, maybe the cookie jar broke itself." You know, he's trying to deny one part of reality in order to get away with another part of reality being denied, and the cork being pushed down that you just mentioned, always comes back to bite them. It always comes back to haunt them. That's why, even if there's no real ghosts, and obviously there are real ghosts, people would still tell stories about them because that's the way our minds work. Our minds try to push away dead things that we wish would stay dead, and they keep coming back. You know, calling out for vengeance, like the ghost of Hamlet. All of these abortion people are haunted by thousands of little tiny baby voices at night of the dead coming for them, of the people they've killed. You know. And it's their mothers. It's not just, you know, killing a random stranger. It's killing your own little precious baby. So they're filled with hatred, and they want to stop the sin. So what they want is revenge against people who haven't committed the sin. Because our mere existence, the fact that we exist at all, is an affront to them. It reminds them, like the little baby feet reminded Abby Johnson, of their own wrongdoing. You see?
It's strange, isn't it? I mean, Christians disagree, and we disagree with the pagans in our wider culture, and even among ourselves. But very rarely will you come to blows over it. It's like
historically,
you might get quite,
we have come to blows over it.
Yes and no. Well, no, that's
in
true.
Ireland,
but,
the Protestants and the Catholics fight each other, and in America, where we have a First Amendment, they get along fine.
But what I was driving at was you can agree to disagree.
Yes.
But for the people of the lie, they can't agree to disagree. I mean, take your average Pride rally and things like that. It's not merely enough to say, I disagree with your lifestyle, but I will leave you in peace. You live the way you want to live. Just leave me alone.
Right.
We'll agree to disagree. That's fine. That's not good enough.
Right.
You must cheer and clap and celebrate and make sure you're not the one that stops clapping first.
Exactly.
But
we know why.
They can't tolerate disagreement. Well, because
it's untrue. Because their conscience is pursuing them like the nemesis. Okay, they're being haunted by the Furies. The Eumenides are coming for them. But they are too proud to seek penance. So they have to do it some other way. And the way they do it is by eliminating everyone they think is accusing them. Even people who aren't accusing them. Even people who are just willing to live and let live. They can't stand that you live and let live if they're sunk in their own guilt. You see? That's why, and there's rules to this. The first rule is they always lie. The second rule is they always double down. And the third rule is that they always accuse you of what they're lying about. You see?
Of course.
Now, in order to undo that, it's a fish trap. It's on a ratchet. In order to undo that, you have to bow your head. You have to be humble. But humility requires you give away your ego. You give up your pride. But if you weren't proud, you wouldn't think you were God in the first place. You wouldn't think you can write your own rules of morality in the first place.
You wouldn't be here,
You would say, you wouldn't have gotten into this situation. See? Now, I used to be a libertarian. I used to be an Ayn Randian type of guy where I just said, let's all live and let live and have the government do nothing but be the night watchman. It should not should not try to enforce the moral order. Now, no one I talked to was adroit enough to go, well, wait a minute, Mr. Libertarian, isn't the moral precept that no one should enforce the moral order a moral order that has to be enforced in your society in order for everyone to live by the precept? You know, I mean, how do you maintain your libertarian society if the government doesn't enforce the conditions that would lead to the people being libertarians? I mean, maybe it's supposed to be cultural, maybe it's supposed to be just a private matter, but in that case, that's a private matter. The libertarian society would stop once most people were no longer decided to be libertarians. Now, who's going to decide not to be libertarians that we just talked about? Now, what changed me was when I saw pro-homosexual propaganda coming over the TV on shows that I otherwise liked, and I said, well, why don't they just leave me alone? Why are they trying to convince me of this this filth, this garbage? And this is before I was an atheist. This is when I was an atheist. I did not think that homosexual was against God's law at that time. I didn't believe in God. Okay? But I knew the difference between true and false, and I knew that it's false that homosexual couples can have babies. I mean, I knew that their sexual impulses were false to facts. They were not in accord with reality, because I believe the correspondence to reality. You see, I believe not just words could be false, but that behaviors could be false. That if you said, I can eat sand and tree bark, and it's just as good as eating meat and vegetables, then that's a falsehood. You can certainly put them in your mouth and chew them, but you will not derive nutriment from them. Now, a libertarian would be willing to let you sit there and eat sand because it doesn't affect him. But then when you try to start shoving it in my mouth, it's no longer the libertarian stance. The libertarian stance is the stance that I mentioned previously, where you agree to do you and I agree to do me, and we leave each other alone. Okay, we don't argue about it. But you can't stop arguing if you feel guilty because you think I'm criticizing you, even if I just exist. See? If I have a happy marriage, you can't stand seeing that because that accuses you. Well, what that means is that the libertarian idea that we could live together in peace with the homosexuals, I have to be precise. With the homosexual lobby, which is a philosophy promoted by many people who are happily married heterosexuals, but the philosophy of critical gender theory, let us call it, that philosophy can't coexist with chastity, because the philosophy says unchastity has to prevail. Not that it has to exist and be tolerated, but it has to be supreme. Okay, for the reasons you just gave. And that's why they want revenge on us. They think that our existence offends them. Merely by being good, they're shocked and offended that we exist. Merely by being truthful, the truth is a weapon to them. It's something that the oppressors do to harm the oppressed. The truth is a light to them that causes them to shrink like vampires.
Of course, but our existence is an affront to them because our mere existence pricks their conscience, and that's what they're...
And proves that they're not God.
That's driving them insane.
And it proves that they're not God. It proves that they just can't wish us away.
Well, it's true. Yeah. Yes. So, that seems like a reasonable place to bring this conversation to an end.
We should end by saying that not only is truth true, but anyone who says truth is not true is trying to destroy the truth, but he only ends up destroying himself. That's the point that this has to drive to, because saying truth is true is not just a truthful statement; it's also a moral statement. And morality is the thing that you use to live in reality. And once you no longer live in reality, you don't get to live somewhere else. You just die. You just stop living. There's not you can't actually move into Elfland, though we all wish we could. So.
The true and the good go together.
Correct. And the beautiful.
And the beautiful. Maybe we should talk about that next time.
That would be beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, John, and we'll talk again in a week.
Very good. Thank you, sir.